Quilty is brought to you by APQS, handcrafted quilting machines. Aurifil, Aurifil Italian thread, perfectly suited for all your quilting projects. Baby Lock, for the love of sewing. Clothworks, inspiring creativity with art on fabric. Hovels Sewing, when you need to cut it close, choose Hovels. B&B, our fabrics, your lifestyle. Quiltology, the urban quilt space.
Quilty.
Okay, everybody, we started you last time on paper piecing basics. Well, today is part 2 of the paper piecing basics episode. Let's check it out. The next piece that you put down on this block that you're making, and by the way, so let's take another look at our pattern. You're always going to have numbers when you're foundation piecing. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I mean, you can get up to 20 something, you can have a lot of pieces in one of these things. You follow the numbers. The first seam that you sew is 1 to 2. The first 2 pieces you join, 1 to 2. Pretty easy to understand that. Then after that, you sew 1 to 3, 1 to 4, and 1 to 5. So our first one, obviously, is we're going to sew 1 to 2. All right? So keeping an extra pattern out, just for reference, is always a good idea. So you've got your teardrop here. We're going to follow this as a guide. Number 2 piece is this little raindrop teardrop fabric. So cute. So if you, and I'm going to put a pin in here. Pin cushion is traveling these days. I don't know why. Okay, so I'm just going to put a pin in for a second to make sure that you see this. So when we flip this over, we need to make sure, once again, that the piece of fabric that we put down is big enough to cover number 2 with 1/4 of an inch on all sides, at least extra, okay? Because you're going to join this block to other blocks, and you need to have that seam allowance there, okay? So when we flip this back over, I've measured this out. I know that this piece of fabric is big enough to cover that number 2 triangle. Let's see. Yeah, okay, number 2 is on this side. It's all reverse, right? So the seam that we're going to sew is 1 to 2, right? We're joining piece 1 to piece 2. So this is going to be our sewing line. What's going to happen when we sew that line? While it's here, think mentally, we're sewing this, we're going to be eventually sewing that line from 1 to 2. What's going to happen then is we're going to fold this back and press it, and then we're going to trim the sides of our block. So when you think about, okay, I have to have this piece big enough to cover that triangle, it's not cover it down here. It's cover it up here so that when you fold it back, it covers. So it really needs to be a big piece of fabric. And when you're first starting out, cut them big. Just cut a huge piece of fabric because you're going to trim it down. You'll have some waste, but as you get better at it, you can cut it a little closer, literally. But once you, and take it up to the light again, I'm going to take it up here, and I'm going to look through, and you can still see your pieces through 2 layers of fabric. So, and this is where it gets tricky. I mean, if you have I'm going to give you a tip about creating your own light board at home. But I need to move this a little bit up this way, and I think I'll be okay. I'm going to scoot it a little bit up, and I think I'm going to make it. This piece is a little small, I'll be honest. It could be bigger. If it was much bigger, I wouldn't have to worry at all. But now I'm going to sew. And remember, we're sewing through paper. I'm going to pin it up here a little bit further from my seam. Okay, so now we flip it, and that's our sewing line. And it's really fun, actually, to sew through paper because it's like the needle makes this awesome punching sound. And it's really cool. Oh, and the light board thing, by the way, a really easy light board you can do at home is just a cardboard box with like a tap light in it, and lay your clear ruler over the top, and then the light shines through that clear ruler, and you can really see on your paper piecing if your fabric is big enough to cover on all sides, plus 1/4 inch on all sides. Okay, so now let's start sewing, and start a little bit before your line begins, okay? You're going to be tearing away this paper, and you want it to be super strong. Take 3 stitches and then back stitch. 3 stitches. On my machine, I just hold it in. I hold in this button, and I back stitch 3 stitches. It's because you want it to be super, super strong. And then You sew down your line. And what the needle's doing is perforating. It's sewing your stitch, your seam, but it's also perforating the paper so that when we tear it away, it's easy to tear. Okay, so when you get to the end, sew like 3 stitches beyond and do your back stitch again. And then take it out of the machine. My little self-threading, self-cutter is great on this machine. Okay, so then we go over here to our pressing surface. So we put this down, and we're gonna fold back what we've just sewn and give it a press. Oh, it's very exciting. Okay, then you have all this extra fabric. Then you start to trim. And you come over to your cutting surface. And this is where, like, once you get the hang of this, this just starts to get really fun. Like, just the trimming and the cutting and everything. You know what, producer, could you hand me my long ruler? I think I put it over there randomly. Thank you, ma'am. So you want a 1/4 inch seam, a 1/4 inch on all sides of this block. So with your ruler, I actually cut it like a 1/2 inch just to be safe. So this is the edge of the block. Get your ruler out, give it a 1/2 inch on all sides. So just give it this 1/2 inch, and then get your rotary cutter out. Cut through the paper, cut through the fabric, flip it over. Check that out. That is some precision. Now don't trim the second side yet because you got to put your other triangle on, okay? Now, in the interest of time, I've done some of this ahead of schedule, or ahead of time. So we've got our first piece on. That was number 2. We look back at our pattern. Number 3 comes next. Number 3 is this little white piece, okay? So just like I did before, bigger piece than I need, pretty side down, press it, and then I would trim it again. Okay, I'm gonna skip ahead one more, and then we're gonna do one more piece together, okay? So I had put on my number 3 piece and trimmed it, and then I could trim the bottom. I don't trim the other side yet because I still have one more piece here. And I've put on my number 4 piece, which is this aqua piece. And now let's do one more piece together and trim it off, and have our first paper piecing block finished, okay? So I'm gonna put this to the side. Are you getting it? I hope so. I wish I could talk to you. I wish that we could like be doing this together, even like live, you know? Okay, our last piece is this yellow piece. We're gonna do this. By the time you get here, you're gonna be like so good at this. So we lay it down. We make sure that if we sew this line right about here, aha, see, this is easy to do. It'd be easy to sew that and be like, yeah, I've covered it. Oh no, but remember, we're gonna fold back. So we have to move it up, okay? Because when we sew right in here, we're gonna fold it back like that, okay? So put this down here. It's a huge piece, so I think we can kind of eyeball it. Right about here is gonna be great. All right, so let's do this. Make sure everything is laying pretty, okay? Lower the presser foot, and you start a few stitches before the line technically begins, because you really want these joints strong. Back stitch a few. Not everybody will tell you to do this, but I've always been taught to do that, and I've never been failed by that. So just follow that line. All the way to the end. 1, 2, 3. Give it a back stitch. This is really the exciting part. All right, so now we're going to take it to the pressing surface, fold it back. It's gorgeous. Do our final trim, and then we get to tear the paper off. And it is so much fun to do that. So throw on the safety glove. You know, there's another way you can kind of like fold the paper back and kind of, there are different ways to do this. There's always different methods, and different quilters learn to do these things different ways. But this is the way I've learned. Okay, our last trim. And remember, we leave this space on all sides of the block because we have to have the seam allowance to join it to other blocks, just like it, okay? Yay! Here we go. I'm gonna move this away, and then we're gonna tear the paper off, and that's it. You're doing it. You're doing it. I'm doing it. We're all doing it. Okay, so after you've sewn, you just start tearing away the paper. We're gonna do a final trim on it too, because we have all this excess fabric. Now, as you get better at this, like I said, you won't need as much extra fabric. You know, like this orange piece is huge. You can kind of like not cut all your fabric quite that big once you get better at this. But in the beginning, don't be shy, you know. You can use your scraps in something else. So this paper gets thrown away, and we have our block. Now, what I would do is take my really nice shears and trim this guy down. I'd trim, make sure you have a 1/4 inch. Don't get it too tight, you know, something like that is fine. And do this to all 4 sides. I'll just do one more here. That's a pretty good scrap. You can save that and trim that, give it a final press, and look at that, you've paper pieced. It's really fun. I love it actually, but it just takes time to get that flipping back and forth right, and don't let your brain melt. Take a break, you know, and watch these episodes again, and join us online. We'd love to hear from you, and you may not be a beginner forever, so learning these techniques are, it's a good idea. So thanks for joining us today. See you later.
Quilty is brought to you by APQS, handcrafted quilting machines. Aurifil Italian thread, perfectly suited for all your quilting projects. Baby Lock, for the love of sewing. Clothworks, inspiring creativity with art on fabric. Hovels Sewing, when you need to cut it close, choose Hovels. B&B, our fabrics, your lifestyle. Quiltology, the urban quilt space.